Good morning, Rebels. It's very nice to be back here on this beautiful Sunday morning. I don't know where November has gone, but it has slipped by very, very quickly. And sometime this week, I had a message from Linda, who follows Rebels Compass, who asked me what the platform was for Rebels Compass. How did it get started? And it got started with my good friend Mel. We sat down one day and we wanted to reach people. We wanted to share our story and let people know basically what's out there, other modalities. And so Rebels Compass was born. And we did our very first video in a coffee shop in Arnprior. And then we did some just in the car and various other places. And then this year transitioned into the studio where I am right now. So that's how it got started. But the platform was to share our personal experiences and just to let people know what modalities are out there so that if they're looking for a place to heal, a place to find information, then this was going to be a resource for that. And as I've mentioned many times, not every key fits every lock. So there are many, many, many different types of modalities out there, and some that I had never heard of. Like having Stacey on 2 weeks ago, talking about the Heilkunst homeopathy, which I practiced saying from the previous video. I'd never heard of that before. So that was my answer to Linda. And today I wanted to share a personal journey of mine that involves one of my children that I have had permission to share this story. So many of you know I have 3 boys and I absolutely adore my children. They are the biggest gift to me. And like most parents, when your children are born, you promise to take care of them. You'll always be there for them. As they're growing up, you always promise that you will support their choices and encourage them to be the best that they can be, to be who they are, and not to just follow along to get along. And part of my own personal journey has been to break free of my own limited beliefs and to step into who I am. And my personal journey had been even being a spiritual person and being able to connect and communicate on varying degrees with spirit or speaking light language. This is outside what's perceived as normal. And so you find yourself not telling people quite who you are or what you can do or owning what's yours. Well, this journey of mine started 4 years ago where I got a phone call from my son. And it was a Sunday afternoon, late afternoon. And he called and said, "Hey, Mom, do you think I can talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "No, not over the phone. I want to talk to you." So I said, "Okay, is everything okay?" And he went quiet for a second and I got that drop in the pit of my stomach and I said, "Is everything okay?" So he said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, I'll come out and I'll see you in an hour." So I drove out to where he was living and I got to the house. Now my son has 2 beautiful boys. And as I knocked on the door, he said, "Can I talk to you outside for a minute?" So then everything about me started to have that feeling of, oh my God, what are you going to tell me? So we walked over to the car and he said, "There's something that's really, really hard for me to tell you, but I need to tell you." So I said, "Okay, are you sick? Is there something wrong? All of those immediate fears, do you have cancer? Have you done something? What are you trying to tell me?" And he said, "I'm transgender." And I think I stood there for a split second or so and I said, "Okay, but what does that mean?" And I know what transgender means, but I didn't know what it meant for him. So he said, I'm really a girl. And I said, I know what transgender is. I want to know what that means for you. You know, does that mean that you are going to pursue being transgender or stepping into that? What does that mean for you? Are you going to continue to be male? What are you going to do? And he said, no, Mom. He said, I've struggled with this for a while, and what I've struggled with is telling my family. What I've struggled with is actually saying the words out loud. He said, so I just need you to know. So I said, okay. And I was shocked. Shocked is the only word I can describe, because that was not what I expected to hear. I expected to hear, you know, I don't feel good, or you know, I've got this or this. That was the last word I expected to come out of his mouth at that time. So at that point in time, I said, have you told anyone else? And he said, no. He said, I wanted to tell you first. He said, you're the first person I've told. So I said, okay. I said, so where do we go from here? And he said, I don't know. He said, I've been terrified all day about telling you because I didn't know what you were going to say. So I said, well, first of all, you're my child and I don't understand, but I'm going to do whatever I can to support where I can support. So I gave him a hug and I drove home. And my drive home my brain was just in overdrive. All I could think about was this little boy that had grown up with so many difficulties. So my son was profoundly dyslexic and had really hard time in school. He was always bullied in school and picked on in school. And I remembered when he was 9 or 10 years old, he'd come home from school and sat under the dining room table with his coat still on from school and his school bag, and just cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. And I kept saying, what's wrong? And he said, Mom, I don't fit here. I don't belong here. I just want to die. And that feeling came back up for me driving home. And all the other challenges, he was socially awkward. He didn't have a lot of friends. He was always this amazingly bright personality, enjoyed laughing at his own jokes and, you know, making people laugh, and great with acting the fool and voices, and a very, very compassionate child growing up. And that's where my thoughts went. It's like, oh my God, you have chosen one hell of a difficult journey this lifetime. And your life has already been so challenged. And that was my drive home. I got home and I promised I wouldn't say anything because it wasn't my journey to talk about at that point. But what I did do the following day, I didn't tell any of my family, but I got in touch with 2 friends of mine that were involved with the LGBTQ. And I called my friend and I said, there's something I need to share with you, and I have no clue where to go. I have no clue what to do at this point in time. And so she said, okay, you know, how can I help? So I said, last night, my son shared the information with me that he is transgender, and I haven't a clue where to go from here. Now, I know that there are people out there that you're going through this right now. Your wife, your husband, your daughter, your son, your friend may have just shared this information with you, and your whole world is going to implode. You're not going to know probably where to go or what feelings are going to come up for you. So my first step was this phone call. So I did this phone call and I spoke to a very, very nice man on the phone who shared with me that 10 or 15 years previously, he was a she and was married and shared some of his journey with me and said, this is a resource for you. This is a place where you can go. And I said, right now I'm looking for information for my son. And he said, that's great. He said, but this is a resource for both of you. So I said, okay, thank you very much. I took his name down and his phone number. And that afternoon, I phoned my son and said, okay, I have this person that you can talk to. And I was still in a state of shock, I think, at that point. So I gave my son the phone number and he said he would call, which he did. And spoke to this gentleman that for the life of me now, I can't remember his name. But he spoke to him several times on the phone and he'd encouraged him to come and talk to me and share information. So I think it was probably maybe a week after this had taken place and I got together with my son again. And at that point, I had started to process some of my feelings. But I was also now in that phase where I was maybe negotiating is the word I want to use right now. So it's, are you sure you really want to do this? Are you sure that this is what you want to do? Because at that point, he'd only just told me that he was transgender. On the next time we got together, not only did he share he was transgender, and I said to him at that point, so are you telling me that you would rather be with boys? Are you gay? And he smiled and he said, well, yes, but no. And I went, wait, what? And he said, yes, I'm gay, but no, I don't like boys. So that my head exploded for a second time. It's like that never even occurred to me. So when my children were growing up, I had lesbian and gay friends in my life. I was a hairdresser. I knew gay men that were hairdressers that were friends. But there was never this term, transgender, that I had grown up with. We had transvestites, which is very, very different. And we had drag queens, which is very, very different. But I'd never ever heard that expression of somebody being transgender and gay. So that was another level of education for me that I had to wrap my head around. So I remember sat there at his dining room table saying, I don't understand. I don't understand. If you like girls, why can't you just stay like you are? I don't understand. And he said, Mom, it's not like that. Mom, you're never going to be able to probably understand this. And I said, no, because I don't walk a mile in your shoes. And he tried to explain the feelings and tried to explain how he had felt in his own body. And I know growing up, I'd mentioned to my children and other people many times, I couldn't even begin to imagine how it would feel to be trapped inside a body that you knew wasn't yours. And here I was faced with a son that was telling me that he had been trapped inside a body that wasn't his, that it was uncomfortable. It didn't fit. He had constantly tried to fit into this male body, but inside that isn't who he was. And that he still was attracted to girls, still was hoping to date girls, but this was the journey. So then I had to do more research. I started to look at other areas where I could gain information, because now I'm working with my own emotion. Now I'm working with fear. And fear is inside of me. And I'm not fearful for me, but I'm fearful for my child. I'm fearful for the world that we live in. I'm fearful of a child that had already grown up with so many obstacles socially in their way. And now I am fearful for my child. And I know when I've spoken to my family and friends Many, many times when I say, if someone has a judgment about you, if somebody is saying something derogatory about you, then it says everything about them and nothing about you. But now I'm faced with a very, very real scenario where there's so much violence and so much bigotry and various other things that are out there in the world. Now my son doesn't fit into the quote unquote social normal. That he is now stepping outside and saying, Mom, I'm very, very different. Mom, I am taking this journey to be who I really am. So I had to work with my own fear and my own emotions of what that meant. And as life is, there's never normally just one thing going on at the same time. So wouldn't life be great if just one thing came along and that was the only thing you were dealing with? But at that point in time, that wasn't the only emotional thing happening in my life. There was many, many other things happening. And so my head was all over the place. And how could I support my child? How could I be there for my child? One that I had promised my entire life, all of them, that no matter what, I'm going to be there for you. I might not necessarily understand what you're going through. I might not necessarily like what you're going through or whatever comes up, but I'm going to be there for you as best I can. Because that's what we teach our children. We teach our children to be who you are. Don't just follow. Don't hide who you are. That's who I shared with, how I'd shared with my kids growing up. Be who you are. And now my son was stepping into that role. So after I had spoken with this counselor and watched YouTube videos and tried to educate myself, because I didn't really know anybody that was transgender in my life, but I did have lesbian friends in my life that could direct me. So they directed me and helped me find the information that I was looking for, so that while there was only me that knew what was going on and my son who was going through this, because I'd promised again that I wouldn't share anything with anyone until he was ready to share with the family. So I said, okay. But what are we going to do about your children? I have 2 beautiful grandchildren. And part of my fear was for them and for my other 2 sons, and, you know, how that was going to unfold. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table saying to my son at that time, are you ready to lose everything in your life? Are you ready? If this is the journey that you are ready to take, are you ready to lose your children because they don't understand, or because their mums don't want them now involved because you're going through this journey? Are you ready to lose your brothers because your brothers don't understand or can't accept? Are you ready to lose your job? Are you ready to lose your home? Are you ready to lose everything? And I remember him sitting right in front of me, and it was an answer that he said, Mum, I can't live this way anymore. He said, so if that's what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen. And I think I cried at that point, and I got up and hugged him and said, are you sure that this is the journey you want to take? And he said, Mum, I have to take this journey. He said, I can't live like this anymore. So I said, okay, so the first thing is we need to tell your kids. So he said, okay. He said, I'm terrified. And he said, I'm absolutely sure you are. He said, and I'm afraid to tell my brothers. And I said, I'm absolutely sure you are. But this is a conversation that you have to have. So I think it was a few days later, he called me and told me that he'd been to his youngest brother and spoken with his youngest brother and his wife. And they had said, well, thank you very much for coming to tell me. And, you know, I'm absolutely sure they were just as shocked as I was at hearing the news. And then You say, okay, thank you very much. And then you process your own emotions after that, which, believe me, is an ongoing thing. And the next journey after that was to tell his oldest son. So his oldest son at that time was 11. And he had just come back from a visit with his family. And my son came to my home and said, okay, will you be with me when I share this? I don't want to be alone. He said, because if he turns his back on me, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I said, absolutely. So we sat out on my front deck, and my oldest grandson sat at the side of us, and we said, you know, we've got something to share with you that is going to change your life. And we can't tell you right now how that is going to change your life. We're just going to tell you it's going to. But we're here for you, and we will answer any question that we can in any way that is possible for us. And at this point, my son sat in front of me crying and couldn't open his mouth. So I was the one that shared that information. And I sat there with my grandson and I said, you know, your dad is going through something that is incredibly difficult for him. And the reason why he's crying is because he doesn't know what the outcome is going to be. But it's a journey that he absolutely has to take. So he just sat there and said, okay. And he turned to his dad and he said, Dad, are you sick? And he said, no, son, I'm not. He said, there's something I need to tell you about who I am. So at this point now, my son's able to speak, and he said, have you ever heard of transgender? And my grandson said, yeah. He said, that's when you are either a boy or a girl, and you either want to be a boy or a girl. So we said, yeah. He said, there's a lot more to it, but yes, that's exactly that. So he sat there and he said, okay. So my son said, I need to tell you that I'm transgender. He said, I have to be a girl. I cannot wear being a male any longer. It's tearing me down inside. It's killing me inside. So my grandson asked some questions, and we answered them the best we could. And one of the questions was, are you still going to be in my life? And he said, do you want me still in your life? And he said, yeah. He said, you're my dad. He said, it doesn't matter to me what you wear, you're still my dad. And I said to my grandson then, I said, but everything's going to change. You need to know that the whole appearance is going to change. And at this point, the words that came out of my grandson's mouth, I will never, ever, ever forget. And he said, it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside. It's who you are on the inside, and you will always still be my dad. And at that point, I broke down and cried. And my grandson got up and hugged his dad and said, I'll always love you. He said, you're my dad. And he said, but is it going to be painful? And he said, yeah, it's going to be physically painful. It's going to be emotionally painful. But I really have to do this. And my son broke down and cried then, because he was so happy that his son was still going to be in his life. So the next step was telling his youngest son, my youngest grandson, who was 8 at the time. Now, my youngest grandson has a condition called dyspraxia, and dyspraxia is when you cannot stand the feeling of clothes on your skin. So sometimes he will put clothes on and he's comfortable with them, and other times he puts clothes on and he has to tear them off. Excuse me. He is screaming that he can't stand them, they're uncomfortable, they don't feel right. So my son felt comfortable at telling his youngest grandson after his experience with his oldest son. So I said, okay. So what he did was he sat his youngest son down and said, there's something I need to share with you. And the way he explained it to his youngest son was, you know, when you feel you have clothes on that you can't stand the feel of? And he said, yeah, because he knows what that feels like. He said, when you put clothes on and they feel really good, how do you feel inside? And he said, I feel happy. And he said, well, when you put clothes on, he said, even if it's the same clothes, when you put clothes on and they don't feel comfortable and they don't feel right, what happens? And he said, I have to tear them off. I don't like them. He said, they make me feel upset. So my son said, that's how I feel inside. He said, and he said, the skin that I'm in feels like it's not my skin. It doesn't feel right for me. It feels like for you when you put clothes on and you have to tear them off. And my youngest grandson got that analogy right away. So once they had been told, then it was telling the rest of the family. So then I went and told my husband. And that was a conversation I had by myself. And I told my husband, who's now my ex-husband, but not for that reason, that his son was going through this. And he said, okay, so what happens next? So I said, well, what happens next is however long this journey takes. So time's going on at this point, and we're gaining more information, and my son has now told me what her name will be. And that, I think that was one of the first questions I asked her, and she said immediately what her name was. So her name, which she said I can share, her name's Katia. So I had to get my head round from calling my son Andrew to now calling him Katia. So I started doing it right away within my thoughts, because when you've been with someone 32 years of your life and then all of a sudden something changes, that's incredibly emotional, and you have to get your head in the right place. So I started sharing or calling him by his new name, Katia, which sometimes the two didn't fit, because Andrew would show up at my house as Andrew, but I'm now trying to use a new name. So it was very disjointed, very emotional, and very, it's difficult. I'm not going to tell any one of you that it was an easy journey, because it was not. And it's one that I struggled with. And by then there was a few friends that I'd started to share with, because now my son had told his story to the family. So now the family knew. Now I was telling extended family and telling friends. So now I had more people that I could share my own emotions and what I was feeling. But one of the things, me being me, I decided that I was going to do the best I could to embrace this journey and find out what it meant for me inside. And like I said, you tell your children you're going to be there for them. But what happens when something is different? You want your children to be the best that they can be, to be who they're going to be. But what happens when your child comes to you and says that the person that's been standing in front of you for however long it is for you out there, for me it was 32 years, and tells you that they are now going to be someone different, even though the person on the inside, the soul is the same, the outside package is very, very different. So emotionally, that's a journey for you. For me, that was my journey. That was my journey that I can only do by myself. You know, I'm being now faced with, well, now you have this directly in front of you, to be the mum that you said you was going to be, to be that person that supports their child, to be there no matter what, for your child to know they are not alone. And for me, this was big because many, many, many years previously, another lifetime ago now for me, I was previously married in the UK, and This is just a side note as to why this was so important to me to support my child. I was going through a divorce, and my parents, my dad in particular, who I was very, very close to, had told me my entire life growing up that I'll always be there for you. There's nothing that you can do that I won't be there for you. And I went and shared with my parents that I was getting divorced. And my dad, the one person that I thought would always be there for me, because he'd always promised to be, had actually turned around and said to me, "You lose your children and you know, daughter of mine." That tore me apart inside. And I made choices then within that divorce that I may have never have made had the very person that had told me that he would be there for me no matter what, be there. I was not going to do that to my children. When I said I was going to be there for them no matter what, that's exactly what I was going to do. So I decided to take the bull by the horns, and my son was now dressing in feminine clothes. We went shopping, trying to find clothes that would be suitable because she was still working, and integrating now her new life, her new way that her I don't even know the right words to use, but integrating how she was now validated in feeling, because this is who she is. This is who she has always known she is. So we went shopping, and she shared that she'd bought this dress online, and my sister-in-law had a wig. So I spoke to my sister-in-law and said, "Can I borrow the wig?" So I invited my now daughter up to my home and asked her to try this dress on. She was going to a party for the very first time in her new body. No, her new, I don't know how to express this, so I'm just going to keep going. So she brought the dress up. I put makeup on my son, my now going to be daughter, and put a wig on and got her dressed. And she was shaking. And she looked in the mirror, and I said to her, "You look fantastic." She looked great. This wig really suited her. The dress looked great on her. And I took her by the hand and I said, "You're going to go to a party?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, now I need to introduce you to your dad." And I took her by the hand and I walked her out into my living room, and my ex-husband was sat on the couch. And I said, "I need to introduce you to your daughter, because this is who she's going to be." And at that point, she wrapped her arms around me and sobbed on my shoulder and said, "Thanks, Mum." That was huge. That was huge for me and for her. So transitioning on in this journey, now everybody knows, and she's going to see a psychologist. So she's going through everything that she needs to go through. So she's seeing her doctor. She's getting the hormone replacement pills that she needs to. She's seeing a psychologist and counselor. So she's doing everything she needs to do to transition. And for them to know that she, in their eyes, psychologically stable enough, because she's 100% on board that she's doing the surgery. And that's a big thing to wrap your head around for her, for me, for family. So by now, there's a year past, and now my daughter is only going as her name, Katia. Her children, I have to shout out to my grandchildren. They are incredibly amazing, compassionate, beautiful children. And they call her Mum. They talk to her openly about the transition that she's going through. And I got a message from my ex-daughter-in-law. So Andrew's ex-wife, just this week. And she was telling me about my youngest grandson, who's now 11, 12, that there's a young boy in school that is having difficulty. And so he goes up and puts his arm around him and said, I will be your friend. I can see that you are not comfortable and that you don't feel like you fit in, and befriended him. And that just blew me away again. Because these two beautiful boys, my two beautiful grandchildren, have grown up now with a transgender parent. And they're going through their own grief and their own loss because they don't physically have their dad. And there may be struggles through that. But maybe through this journey, they will also know that not everything is as it shows up to be. Not everything is black and white, that everybody has their story, everybody has their own journey to take. And it's through our own compassion and non-judgment that we may not necessarily always understand that journey, but we can be compassionate for other people and what that journey might be for them. So my grandchildren are now, like I say, calling Katia mum, and Katia is now going everywhere as female, and she's becoming more comfortable with that. And I'm becoming a little bit more comfortable with that. But I look around my house and I've got pictures of my son, and I've got a grief inside of me that I don't even know how to find the words for. It's I've got one side of me that wants to support my son in his transition into my daughter, and I've got a part of me that's grieving a loss that there's no finality to. There's no, it's not like grieving my parents when both my parents died. You know, I said goodbye to my parents. I buried my parents with my family, and there's like a finality to that. There's closure to that. I find with this, I'm working through that. This is still a process for me, because my son didn't die. My son transitioned into my daughter. And I know for those of us that are spiritual say, yes, but they transitioned, and transitions transition. But this is very different. This is very different because the physicality of that person is still here. And so now time has passed, and we're getting to the point now where my son has got the all clear to have the surgery. So we're just waiting for the surgery. And every opportunity I got, every opportunity, like I went through the shock, I went through the negotiating. Are you sure you don't want to be like this and do this? Are you sure you don't want to just dress as a girl and do all of that and just still be you? I think I went through every conversation that I could with my son, trying to negotiate, I think, and trying to make it comfortable within my own being to wrap my head around and to, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily come to terms with it. I was trying to negotiate, I think, a compromise where she didn't really have to do what she wanted to do and still stay Andrew, but dress as somebody else, because that was a compromise inside of me. That was, again, my fear. My fear was, how was the world going to respond? Because the world's not necessarily always a positive place. And people have their own emotions and their own experiences and their own judgments and religious backgrounds and whatever that is for you out there, that even listening to this video, you're going to have your own thoughts and emotions and feelings, and everybody is valid to feel what they feel. I'm not sharing this video to change anybody's mind. I'm sharing an experience because somebody else might be experiencing the same thing, to say that you're not alone. So the next journey for me was picking Katia up. She was staying at a friend's, and there's lots of stuff gone on in between, but this is going to be a short video or a shorter video. But now I'm at the point where I'm picking picking Katia up to take her to Montreal. The time's come when she's going to have this surgery. And she's staying at a friend's house, and I pick her up and I drive her to Montreal. And I expected this place to be like a hospital. And it's called a hospital, but it doesn't look like a hospital. It just looks like an office building. So I was a little shocked at how it looked. And all the way down there, I'm asking her, are you sure this is what you want to do? I can turn around and drive you back home. Are you sure this is the journey you want to take? And I remember her grabbing me by the hand, and she said, Mum, I love you. It's going to be okay. But this is the journey I need to take. So I said, okay. So drive to Montreal. We finally find somewhere to park. We get into this building, and she goes and gives a name, and they do all the appropriate things that they need to do to register someone in. And she changes and sits down next to me in the chair waiting for her name to be called. And there was 2 other people in there in the waiting room. And the whole time I'm saying to her, are you sure this is what you want to do? Are you absolutely sure? And she said, Mum, I really need to do this. I can't live my life for everybody else anymore. And I know it's going to upset some people, but I really have to be me. She said, I have to do this. So I hugged her and I said, okay, I'm here. So let's do this. So probably about 15 minutes later, a name was called, and I wasn't allowed to go beyond a certain point with her. So I hugged her. And that was the point I knew I was saying goodbye to Andrew. I walked out of that building and I got in my car, and I'm not familiar with Montreal at all. So I Googled the closest mall and drove into a mall and went in to get myself a tea. And I'm sat in my car, and I can't sit in my car. So I'm wandering around this mall, and anybody that's ever been in that place where something has happened and you walk around in a daze, I was walking around in a daze. I was walking around in this mall, not really paying attention to anything really that was going on. Just walking for walking's sake. And then I got a phone call, and I have an adopted daughter that I love her immensely. And she called me and she said, hey, Mama, how's it going? And I said, hey, it's going good. So she said, where are you? And I said, I'm just in a mall. So I walked out of a mall and I stood in the corner of the doorway. And so I took myself right into the corner of this doorway, and I was talking to her on the phone. And she said, no, really, how are you? And I said, yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, I said, I just dropped Kat off, and I looked at my watch and I stopped. And she said, you okay? And I said, no. No, I'm not. Because I knew at that point she was having the surgery done. And I could not fathom to this day what courage it took for her to have that surgery. But all my mind could think of was the finality of it. And I think I cried for a couple minutes on the phone. And I said, you know, this is Kat's doing what she needs to do. We're going to get through all of this. And she talked to me on the phone, and we laughed and we joked, and I got off the phone. I was maybe on the phone to her maybe I don't know, 15 minutes or so, maybe longer. And I had to stay out of the hospital until the surgery was done. So I wandered around the mall a bit more, and all my mind kept going back to was how difficult my son's life had been in certain challenges, and my other two boys, and the journey that they were going to now take. They were losing a brother, and they now had to get to know a sister and the rest of my family. And you know, when you flip a pebble in a pond, it makes little ripple effects. Well, something like this is a huge, great big boulder that gets dropped into that pond that makes huge waves. And my heart goes out to any one of you that are going through this journey right now. So if you are somebody that's transgender and you are going through this journey, my heart is with you, because I know I haven't walked your shoes, but as a parent, I have. And it takes tremendous courage and bravery to be who you are. And I take my hat off to you. For any parent, husband, wife, sibling that is going through this journey right now with somebody in your life, my heart goes out to you tremendously, because as you can see in my story, it's still emotional. For me, I miss my son. Every single day, I miss my son. I look at photographs of my son growing up, and I miss my son. But I am incredibly proud of my daughter, and I am still getting to know my daughter. And we have a great relationship. And for you, it's going to be your journey. This is mine. You're going to have those days when you want to cry, and I have done that. And as you can see, I'm still doing that. You're going to have days when you're angry and trying to negotiate it. And at the end of the day, all I can be is there for my kids. And I'm there for my other two sons that are going through their own emotional journey of grieving and missing a brother, because that void is still there. Even though the person is still here and they look different, you're still going through that emotional grief and that emotional loss. And I look at my grandchildren and I grieve their loss of not having their dad around, even though they have another mum. So for me as a mum, I grieve all of that. I grieve my grandchildren's loss. I grieve my children's loss. I grieve the loss of my son for myself. But on the flip side of that, I take in the courage. So Kat has become this, and not just Kat, anybody. So any of you that are doing this journey, any of you that are stepping outside of what's normal or considered normal in your circle, I really take my hat off, because it's difficult in this world to stand up and say, this is who I am. Because so many people want to tear you down. So many people want to have you fit in a box just so it doesn't affect their life any differently. So that their life continues to be the same as it's always been, because they don't like change, or because they don't want to journey those emotions that come up inside of themselves. And I've sat with my daughter on many occasions and told her how I feel, told her the grief and the loss, and told her she knows that I still miss Andrew. I've told her, and she puts her arms around me and she says, I know, Mum. And I'll say, but I love you. And she says, I know, Mum. So she gives me the space to be able to share what I feel. she gives me the space to be able to say, this is uncomfortable for me, or this makes me fearful, or this makes me unhappy, or whatever the emotion has been for me. She has given me or honored the space for me to express how I feel, because I have honored her and given her the space to express what she feels. And we have a great relationship. One of the things, my son growing up, when he was very, very small, even right up into his adulthood, my son found it very, very difficult to express emotion. If I gave my son a hug, he would stand there and put his arms down by his side and never, ever hug me back. My other two boys, I could get sat on my knee and give them a snuggle and cuddle them up. And, you know, him I could never do that with. He never wanted to sit on my knee and snuggle. He never wanted to have hugs. But she does now. So my daughter now frequently puts her arms around me and gives me a hug and tells me she loves me. And my daughter, I just have a completely different relationship. And it's a daily expansion of, as she steps more and more and more into the power of who she is. And this is her journey. This is her journey. Her children will learn something because of this journey. I have learned something because of this journey. I'm sure my children have. For you, I know it's going to be one of those ups and downs and roller coaster journeys. But it's one that I'm glad that I took. It's one that I have never, ever, ever looked back in regret that I wanted to support or be there for Kat. I've never looked back and said, I wish I wasn't there when she had the surgery, or I wish I wasn't there for this. I am glad that I have been there for every single solitary step of that journey. Because when anything's ever come up for me, I look for what that really means for me. And I can say, for me, categorically, the overwhelming feeling that came up for me was fear through the beginning of this journey. Fear, as I mentioned, fear for her grandchildren, fear for what my family was going to say, and fear for how that would unfold for her. And through the process of her journey, yes, she's lost some things. And some of them were significant things at the time. But one thing she has not lost is her family. And some of the family don't necessarily understand the journey, and that's okay, because this is an ongoing journey. This is something that, as we find the words, we can express, we can create space to try and understand. But judging someone for where they're at isn't understanding. It isn't compassion. And we may never know the reason why someone takes that journey, but we can be compassionate for them. And Kat has taught me a lot. She's taught me a lot about stepping up and owning who you are. So by watching her unfolding journey, my voice to myself is, well, if Kat can do that, you can do what you want to do. If Kat can do that, then you can do it. You know, if other people can do this, so I've come through some of my own challenges and stepped up and done a lot more than I ever thought I could. And it's the people in my life and the journey that they bring that helps me unfold mine. And I really, really wanted to share this, my personal experience. And I'm sure there's a lot more that I can share. But anyway, after Kat had that surgery done, the hospital called me and told me that I could go back and see my daughter. And I think for me, that was just the whole finality of that experience. Even now, as my memory goes back to that, it's that, wow, that's just so final. there's no going back from that. And I think for me as a mum, I wanted to make sure that she was comfortable with the final choice, knowing that there was no going back from that. And when I saw her in the hospital, she was all wired up and she was awake enough to talk to me. And I asked her, was she okay? And she said, yeah. I said, are you happy you've had this done? And she said, Mum, you've no idea. And I said, no, I don't. But I'm glad I was here for you with it. And I drove home from Montreal back to Perth and processed some of my own emotions, and again went down memory lane looking at my family and how my family dynamic was now changed, and answering questions for my grandchildren in the best way I knew how, and being there for my other two boys the best way I know how. And grief often comes up in anger. So when you're experiencing grief, that can come up in anger. It'll come up in an attack. Take a moment to just look at that anger and ask yourself, what's the root of that? And the root of that may be fear. Fear of how your life is now going to change. Fear of how your son or daughter's life's going to change. Fear of what other people think. And I'm here to tell you, it is not about what other people think. It's about how you feel about you. It's about how you look at yourself in the mirror. Do you like what you see? Are you going to support someone around you even though you don't understand it? For me, that was the only journey I could take. For me, that was my only option. And along the way, I was going to learn. Along the way, I was going to experience what I experienced, and I still am. This is hopefully going to be a long life journey where my daughter continues to grow and expand and truly step into who she is and make changes in her life the way she wants to. But I'm always going to be there in her life. And she's lucky enough, she still has both her boys in her life and both her brothers and the rest of her family. And like I say, we don't always understand, but that's okay. Because it's through that lack of understanding that you have a choice. You either find the understanding through communicating with the person that's going through that experience, or you look for other ways to find understanding. And I truly, truly want to thank you for being here, for allowing me to express this journey. And probably after Christmas now, Kat and I are actually going to get on and do the part 2, if you like, of this journey so that we can have dialogue between us of what her experience is next to mine. And the reason why I wanted to do this today, just me, is because this is my personal journey. These are my personal feelings. And so that when Kat does come on, we can have that, at this point in time, she felt this and I felt that. And through that, we gain a deeper level of understanding. We can only gain a deeper level of understanding through communication, not by slamming a door, not by yelling and screaming. You know, if you're going to yell and scream, great, yell and scream. Every single emotion that you are going to experience is valid. But if it's all possible in your life, don't leave the door closed. Because you never know, this may be one of the greatest journeys of discovering who you are. Always open a door, communicate where you can, because communication is key to everything about understanding and compassion. And we know we need more of that in this world. We need to be more compassionate and understanding and less judgmental. So this is my journey, my experience, and I thank my son who sat here beside me, listening to this journey for the very first time himself too, because this is stuff that I've not shared with them either, because my children, you always try and protect them. And I know I'm so close with my boys and my daughter, that if I get emotionally upset, the first thing they want to do is protect and defend me. And I want them to express what they feel, because I know that they have their own grief and they need to process that too. So I thank Vocal House Studio for being here for me today, for allowing this platform for me to be able to share one of the greatest journeys in my life. And there have been a few, and some of them I've already shared. But I think for me, because this involved my children, something that was way out of my control, because there's nothing about this that you can control, only your own emotions and your own feelings. This was probably one of the biggest ones, because I had to stand by as a parent and watch it unfold and just manage how I was feeling and expressing what I was feeling. So I hope you have an amazing day. Please, please, please share this video, because you never know who is out there that needs to hear something that I have said. Reach out to me. If you are going through this right now, if you need someone to talk to, and I by far don't have all the answers, all I can do is share what my experience has been. And maybe by coming together, we can support each other, because that's what Rebels Compass is about. It's about sharing so that we can bring a deeper level of understanding. It's about sharing so that you know you're not alone. It's about sharing so we can lend a hand and say, I'm here to support, and up-level each other to be the best version of ourselves we can be, even if it doesn't look like it did a year ago or 2 years ago. Because by evolving into who you are, everything changes. Everything changes. Whether you're straight, gay, transgender, does not matter. We are all on a journey of evolving into the best version of ourselves. So please share this video. Have an amazing day. Hug your family. Enjoy the sunshine. And I will see you here again next week. And Ben, I want to thank you immensely for being here in this space and allowing me to share this. I love you. Take care, everyone. Bye.